All right. So, well, we look at administrative access, system crash, hardware failure. I think that is straightforward enough. I don't think we need to spend more time there. We've been looking at how to recover from that anyway and how to protect your computer from that. Yeah. Physical theft. I don't think it's really my job. If your computer gets stolen, call the police, right? But physical theft is a threat that you have to worry about as well. If you lose your computer, you lose all of the data that's on that computer, all of the access that that computer has, right? There's a nice little example here. I'm going to leave that for you guys to read through. Malware. We were just speaking about ransomware. Ransomware is a type of malware, but there are a number of different types of malware, right? One of them, again, I was alluding to earlier is, I like to call it flash drive AIDS. It's not my number of different names. They call it the flashy viruses or they call it by a number of different names. But they are less prevalent now, but maybe maybe 2 years ago, they were really popular in that they would affect flash drives that get plugged into an affected computer and would just spread from the flash drives to any other computer that the flash drives will plug in because of the autoplay. All right. So that's a basic example of malware. We have ransomware, which will infect your computer, find all of your important files, encrypt them, and then send you a ransom where you have to pay them some thing to gain access to your files again, if they even give you access back. All right. What other types of malware do you guys know about? Let's have a quick discussion on malware right there. What other types of malware do you guys know about? So we just look at ransomware and your basic virus, worm virus. Here's another one. Have you guys heard of adware? Adware, no?
Yeah, they come with ads.
Right. Adware, not come with ads, but adware is actually a malware that can infect your computer and basically permit advertisers to send you ads, right? Maliciously, meaning without your permission. We know that if most websites right now will, especially news websites, they will, when you go on the site, a pop-up will come up asking you if you want to receive notifications from that website. If you make the mistake and click allow, what will happen is, YouTube also is famous for that. They will have the permission to send a little notification by your notification area next to your clock about updates, videos they think you might want to watch, articles they think you might want to read, and so on, right? But you essentially, it might be annoying, but you have to give permission for that to happen. With adware, you do not need to give permission. Once adware gets a hold of your computer, you will get tons of pop-ups, you will get notifications, you will think that it's website sending pop-ups, but really and truly, you have a malware sitting on your computer that is really generating pop-ups and sending them in your direction at a very annoying rate, right? So that is another one. Any other types of malware you can think of? We have Trojans, we have worms, we have viruses, we have keyloggers, we have a few others, right? I think the book covers them in a little more detail lower down, so we're gonna wait for that. Let's just continue going in order. Well, environmental threats, we looked at that already. Chemicals, dust, hot, cold, wet, salt, whatever the case might be. Power. That's just a throw in there. We already know that we need to protect our computer from power issues, right? You have power surges, power spikes that can affect your computer. So things like a UPS surge protector, these go into protecting your computer as well, securing your computer from damage. But we're not gonna go through that in detail. I mentioned air. How's the air in there? Clean. The air needs to be clean, right? Dry. Not too dry, not so dry that there's static in the air. but not so wet that it's humid and condensation happens. Cool, right? We know the requirements, the environmental requirements for a computer. We need a dust-free, cool environment. All right, so we're not gonna read through that in detail. Get an air conditioning unit. Again, we had the discussion on temperature and humidity, right? Your computer likes it cool and it likes relative humidity. Here's a figure in the 40% range. Colder and drier is better for computers, but not for people. So you need to find the balance between the two. All right. Toxic materials, that goes without saying. Yes, some materials are toxic for your computer, especially if you have a laptop. Tea, juice, water, maybe not so much breadcrumbs, but those sort of things are toxic to your computer, right? If you throw down your tea or juice, your oats on your laptop, you will almost certainly need to purchase replacements for multiple components or your laptop itself, right? Okay. Any questions on anything that we've gone through so far? It's one of those straightforward chapters we can run through. Everybody okay so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let me read that little section. Right? And then we'll run through the various concepts that it covers afterwards. So security concepts and technologies. Once you've assessed the threats to your computers and networks, you need to take steps to protect those valuable resources. Depending on the complexity of your organization, this can be a small job encompassing some basic security concepts and procedures, or it can be exceedingly complex. For instance, it's a very small job if you work for my company, right? You just have a few employees, a small office. It'll be a much different job if you work for Flow that have multiple offices around the island, multiple employees, multiple levels of access, and so on. You understand what I mean, right? Or if you're working for the government, for a government department, right? That, well, the government is large. You never know who's working for the government. And security needs would vary. From a Comptia A+ certified technician's perspective, you need to understand the big picture, knowing the concepts and available technologies for security. At the implementation level, you're expected to know where to find such things as security policies in Windows. A Computer Network Plus or Security Plus Tech will give you the specific options to implement. So you realize that we never went through specific security policies or group policies in the A+ course. We went through them, we looked at a few individual ones, but we didn't go through them in detail. That is because that is reserved for your Network Plus technicians and your Security Plus technicians, which are the next two courses if you have the intention of getting into computer and network security, all right, or getting deeper into becoming a technician or system administrator. So your Network Plus or your Security Plus technician will give you the specific options to implement. You just need to know where to go to implement it. So that would be, again, your administrative tools, security policies, local security policy or group policy, right? Depending on your version of Windows. And you need to know how to actually implement those specific policies. But again, most times that is fairly straightforward. The exception to this level of knowledge comes in dealing with malicious software such as viruses, but we'll look at that later. So let's look at three concept and technology areas: access control, data classification and compliance, and reporting. What do we mean by access control? Anybody?
Well, to
Actually, we were speaking of them earlier in the first part.
yeah,
We
to
could have physical access, right? Access control, meaning you need a key to access the building, or you need an access card, or you need a whatever other method to control access, right? Or you could control access, for instance, with a username and password. So without the username and password, you don't have access to the account or to the features that you need. All right. Again, I'm not gonna go through it in detail because these are simple concepts that you already know about and know how to implement. For instance, even if it's in your bedroom, you have your computer, you know how to keep your computer safe by locking your room and controlling access, right? So we're not gonna go through that in so much detail. But let's look at some options. If you work for a larger company, like for instance, Clear Harbor or Flow or some government departments, you could use your ID card or your access badge, right, for access. So these would typically be either your magnetic stripe cards, like your standard credit card, or your smart card with the chips built in, or they also have the magnetic well, the cards with a physical magnetic chip in it rather than the smart cards, right? All of those can be used for access. You could also use passcodes for access. You know, every user could have their individual username and passcode, and a number of other methods. But we're just looking at a few options now. Smart cards. That is an example of the privacy filter I was telling you guys about earlier for protecting your portable computers from shoulder surfing, right? Notice when you have the filter on, you can see as if there's nothing in front of you, no filter in front of you, looking straight ahead. But from a slight angle, you will not be able to see anything on the screen. It appears tinted. All right, and we call these privacy filters. Yeah. This is a little tip I want you guys to know. Again, especially if you're working with people, you're working with customers, and you have to educate people on protection of their devices, which you probably are responsible for maintaining, right? Security is more of an issue when users walk away from their computers, even for a moment. When you see a user's computer logged in and unattended, do the user and your company a huge favor and lock the computer. And you can do that easily. Just walk up to the computer and press Windows key and L on the keyboard. That will lock the computer, and they will have to put in their password in order to enter the system again. All right. Authentication. We looked at authentication in an earlier chapter, right? You guys can remember what authentication is? We looked at it in conjunction with authorization, which was authorization and authentication. Do you guys remember those two? Okay, so let me just read through that. Security requires properly implemented authentication, which means in essence, how the computer determines who can or should access it. And once it is accessed, what that user can do. That would be the authorization, all right? A computer can authenticate users through software or hardware or a combination of both. And remember, we discussed multi-factor authentication. In multi-factor authentication, it's not just a matter of what you know that determines who you are, but also multiple factors such as you having a physical device on you, like your smartphone, or you having access to your email account to get a security code they might send to your email to verify that it's really you trying to log in, right? So you need to ensure that there's a proper method for authentication, right, on your computer systems in order to maintain security. In other words, if anybody can authenticate and gain access to your system, that's not a very secure system, right? If only you and one other person has the password that can authenticate into a particular system, then that's a lot more secure. We're not going to have any further discussion on things like proper passwords. I'm sure you guys know how to manage your passwords. Even though it may be difficult, yes, it's difficult. Proper password management requires you to change your password at least once every 90 days. And it can be annoying, but we just have to find ways to deal with it. I'm gonna leave you on your own with that. Unless you have any questions for me on it. Okay. Some other ways you can protect your system: BIOS or UEFI passwords. We discussed that when we were looking at the BIOS, right? Typically, you have two passwords you can set in your BIOS: a user password and an admin password, or it might be called differently. You might see an admin and a supervisor password. Whatever it is, one password would give you access to the computer itself, meaning if you don't have that password, Windows will not boot. And the second password will give you access to the BIOS settings or the CMOS setup, right? If you don't have that password, you can't make any changes to the CMOS setup. Both of these passwords are set from your CMOS settings that you access on startup. You should already be familiar with how to do that. If you don't, or you have any questions on that, you can hit me up privately and let me know. Another example of hardware authentication, right? Using smart card. That is actually a keyboard mounted smart card reader. So that computer requires you to swipe your smart card to authenticate that it's you, right? Before you can log into the computer. That is one method you can use for security as well on your computers. Security tokens. I'm not sure if any of you used the early Bankernet, where they gave you a token that would generate a PIN code for you every few seconds. And without that token, you would not get access to your Bankernet account or your national bank online banking account, right? That's an example of the hardware tokens. We also use them for a number of different things. These days also, you don't have to use the hardware tokens. Google actually has a software token application. I think it's called Google Authenticate or something like that, that you can actually use. A lot of platforms already use that as multi-factor authentication to log into your secure accounts, mainly things like cryptocurrency and so on. But you can get these tokens as a physical token, or you can have software tokens as well these days. All right. I'll leave that alone. You guys will go for that in your reading. Any questions for me so far?
No, sir. Nothing.
All right. You could also use biometrics, right, to secure access. So here we see a keyboard with fingerprint access. So in other words, with this keyboard and a proper software and setup, for you to gain access to your computer, you need to swipe your finger, right? Or scan your fingerprint. And if you don't have the right fingerprint, you won't gain access. Very likely there will be a password and so on you can use in the event of your fingerprint not working. But the easy way to access it would be through your fingerprint. Most of our mobile phones nowadays include fingerprint scanners to log us in, or facial scanners, retinal scanners to log us in now, right? I'm sure at least one of you have a smartphone that requires your fingerprint to log in. Am I right? Okay. Users and groups. We had an entire class on users and groups. I'm not sure if you guys remember. You remember that? Where I explained how you could create different groups, right? And rather than giving each individual user certain permissions, you could assign the permissions to certain groups and just make the users part of the groups and therefore give them the permission that was assigned to the group, right? Again, this chapter just enforces the use of user accounts and groups for access control and security, right? It's not anything much different than we've done before, so I'm going to skip over it except for this. That's the phrase I was looking for earlier. So let me just read that here for you. So access to user accounts should be restricted to the assigned individuals, and those who configure the permissions to those accounts must follow the principle of least privilege. Does anyone know what I mean? The principle of least privilege. What that means?
If you don't need access, you don't give the access.
Right.
You give as limited access as necessary.
Right. So the principle of least privilege, I was desperately trying to come up with that term a little higher up when I was trying to explain why you don't use an admin account for your everyday computing, right? The principle of least privilege. Basically, it means if you don't need access to a particular resource, you shouldn't have access to a particular resource, even if you're the administrator, all right? So the account you use should have the permission to access only what you need, right? And no more. Everybody understand that? That is called the principle of least privilege. And in the event you need more privilege, then you would put in your admin password. All right? And let me just finish with that little thing, that little paragraph there. So tight control of user accounts is critical to preventing unauthorized access. Disabling unused accounts is an important part of the strategy, but good user account management goes far deeper than that, right? And we discussed it earlier, as I mentioned, with using the groups to manage your users and so on. And the permissions, but all of those things we have covered in earlier chapters. Use the guest account for guests. All right. Avoid using your generic groups like everyone or guest or user. All right. You can create, I did also show you how you can create your own group classifications, all right, to make it more difficult for hackers to gain access to your systems using generic information. And we also looked at security policies and what they can do on your system. For instance, a security policy might say users can only log on between the hours of 8 and 4. If it's 5 o'clock, if it's after 4 in the afternoon, they cannot log on, and if it's before 8, they cannot log on. Therefore, if you try to gain access to the system outside of working hours, it will not enable you to log on. That's an example of a security policy. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of security policies that you can implement that will give you various levels of protection on your computer. A+ is not the place for it. There are tons of them. But basically, just know that policies are things that you can implement to enforce access and control on your computer system, right? We also know how to get to it using the administrative tools in the control panel, right? You can access your local security policy. You can also access your group policies. On that image, let's see an example of some policies we have. We can deny access to this computer from the network, all right? We can deny logon as a service. We can deny logging on locally, so you can only log on remotely. You can force shutdown from a remote system, and you can see here only administrators can force shutdown from a remote system. And you can see here that only guests are actually denied access to this computer from a network, right? And they're turned for the policies, audit policies, user rights, security options. If you do have it on your computer, which typically you need a professional version of Windows to have these advanced options, right? Go through it and see what you can configure, what sense you can make of. But A+ does not go through the security policies in detail. Any questions on the security policies? All right. Here's another example of a group policy. You can customize the text that appears on the title bar of Internet Explorer. So you can make your Internet Explorer say something like powered by somebody else. All right. These are examples of policies. Again, we're not going to go through it in detail. Exam tip. Let me just read through that exam tip here. Account management security policy best practices dictate that you should implement restrictive user permissions, login time restrictions, account lockout based on failed attempts, and disable the operating system built-in auto-run or autoplay features. Finally, you should always change the default system usernames and passwords when possible. Does everybody understand all of these things here? Well, we know what restrictive user permissions is, right? The principle of least, I forget it again, but we know what that is. I think I just explained login time restrictions. You can configure your system so that you can only log in during particular times, right? What is account lockout based on failed attempts? Anybody can tell me?
Well, I've plenty of that one with NVIDIA and my forgetting my password.
Yeah, when you put in your password wrong,
Yeah, it will lock you out and you have to reset from the bank.
Yeah, or go into the bank. But on Windows, what will happen is it'll lock you out for like a minute or 2 minutes or 15 minutes or half an hour, depending on what you configure it at. All right. Okay, what about disabling the operating system's built-in auto-run or autoplay features? What benefit does that have?
When you plug in a flash drive, it will disable any executable file
Right.
from.
So up till a few years ago, all flash drives, when you plug them in, it was a big feature that Windows would automatically ask you what you want to do, if you want to open, or it might automatically just run the file, or just start the setup, or do whatever, right? These days, we want to disable that because if your flash drive is affected by a virus, the flash drive, the virus will auto-run itself, and your computer will give it the permission that it needs to auto-run itself and infect your computer. So that's why we want to disable those auto-run or autoplay features, right? And again, it's straightforward why we should change the default name and passwords, because it makes it easy for people to guess. All right. Okay, data classification and compliance. Sorry, just give me a quick second. Okay, so larger organizations, such as government entities, benefit greatly from organizing their data according to its sensitivity. What's called data classification, and making certain that computer hardware and software stay
by the water
as possible.
You wanted what bread? They buy the what?
Yeah, I gonna meet you, Janelle. In addition, many government and internal regulations apply fairly rigorously to these organizations. Data classification systems vary by the organization, But a common scheme classifies documents as public, internal use only, highly confidential, top secret, and so on. We've all heard about top secret and above top secret or classified or those sort of terms, right? These are typically terms that the US government and other government use to classify data. Some data is public knowledge. Public knowledge is available for everybody to use. Internal use only means only people within the company has right to see and use that information. Highly confidential means keep it to yourself. If you get it, don't tell nobody about it, keep it to yourself. Top secret means if you tell them, we might do you something, and so on. Above top secret, you might disappear, but you get the idea, right? Certain data are classified in certain ways, and if you do not have the authority for it, then essentially you should not gain access to it. Sorry about that. And compliance, we know what compliance is, right? Compliance means in a nutshell that members of an organization or company must abide by or comply with the rules that apply to the organization or company. So if they tell you that that email is top secret, you need to comply and not send it to anybody else. Don't forward it, don't make a copy of it, don't print it, but comply with top secret, and that means keep it from your eyes to your brain and nowhere else. All right? Comply also means if they tell you put on your mask, put on your mask. If they tell you sanitize your hands before you go in the supermarket, you sanitize your hands, all that goes into compliance. All right, so that's straightforward enough. Licensing. Do I need to go through licensing for you all? We had so many discussions on that, directly and indirectly. But let's just run through it. Commercial licensing basically means you have to pay money to get a license to use the software, such as Microsoft Office. All right. Non-commercial licensing means that, well, it's not really for sale. You have access to it, such as Linux. You know that Linux is open source, right? Right now, if you're looking for an operating system to install on your computer and you don't have a copy of Windows, I'd recommend you go online to Linux website, get a copy of Ubuntu, right? And it's a free Linux-based operating system that you can install on your personal computer and run it. It's a non-commercial, it has a non-commercial license, right? You might also hear about open source versus closed source. Can anybody tell me what that means? Sorry guys, give me 1 minute. I have a call coming. Actually, let's take a break here and we'll come back in 5 minutes, okay?
Okay, sir.
All right, so I'll see you guys in 5.
Happy, sir.